Hey, what's going on, everyone? Greg here, and whoa, it looks like Apple is about to complete the transition to Apple Silicon faster than we initially thought, because it looks like Apple is getting ready, according to this report from Mark Gurman, to basically jump out of the gate in 2022 and introduce a bunch of new Macs. And this transition shouldn't be complete by the end of this year. It should actually be done by the middle of this year, by June in WWDC, which is something even I wasn't expecting, because even though I thought they might announce a Mac Pro at WWDC, and that's the date I've kind of been telling you to wait for that new Mac Pro, I thought it would just be an announcement, not an actual release date, and it looks like that's actually going to happen. So for this video, I kind of want to talk all about these Macs, actually give you some even more information about Apple's new external display, and I am just really excited. It's 2022, and before we get into the video though, I gotta address the biggest controversy in the tech sphere right now. My hair. Yes, I did a video where I didn't style my hair, and it got a lot of reaction, a little bit too much reaction, I thought, from my YouTube comments. Some people love the hair, some people hate it, some people were confused by it, some people were upset when I styled my hair for the next video and said, Greg, what happened to the new hair? I like that hair better. So now we're in this moral conundrum. But you know what? Hair up, hair down. I got the best hair in all of tech YouTube. I don't, you put me up against any other tech YouTuber out there. Put me up against Travis MCP. Put me up against Viper. There's no way that they have better hair than me. And even some of the hard hitters in the tech sphere, there's just no one who has a better hairdo than this guy right here. So, sorry to all the other people in tech world. You can't beat me there. The only person that could stand a chance is Canoopsy, but then he went and dyed his hair blonde. So, I don't even think he really holds a candle to me anymore. Ever since he went Super Saiyan, I still think I got the better hair. But, you didn't come to talk about my hair problems. You came to hear about these new Macs. And, we've been talking about these Macs for a while, and this is more of a laid-back video more than that straight information. Kind of want to give you more of my opinions about these Macs, but listen, I've been talking about them for a while, so we still have the transition of Apple's desktops, like the big 27-inch iMac, which I think is going to be called the iMac Pro, a Pro version of the Mac Mini, and, of course, the Mac Pro. Now, when you look at a computer like the iMac Pro, I think that's the one that's going to have the most appeal, because I think it's going to be the most compelling package out of all of these new Macs. Apple is going to do the same magic here. They are going to bundle in their new Apple Silicon chipset, so we're probably looking at least we're looking at an M1 Pro and M1 Max chip, the same ones that are in the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, but it sounds like with more of the recent rumors, actually to my surprise, it looks like there might be some separation here for the iMac Pro, and it actually might get an expanded chipset over these laptops. That was one of the things I was worried about when we first saw this Apple Silicon transition, and we first saw like a computer like the 24-inch iMac that's behind me. When the 24-inch iMac was unveiled, I was actually surprised that Apple just reused the same M1 chip, and it's a fine chip for that computer, but when you start to look at more of the Pro-level desktops that Apple still has to come out with, even though the M1 Pro and M1 Max and those laptops are like insane, there are areas where it could start to fall apart in a bigger desktop computer if you're comparing it against Windows computers. Now, I know the optimization for Apple Silicon's a little different, so you really can't do a one-to-one anymore with like an Intel chipset or an AMD chipset, but if we're just looking at like raw GPU performance and stuff like that, if you look at the heavy hitters in the Windows space when it comes to like dedicated GPUs, the iMac Pro, this 2022 iMac Pro, would probably need something more powerful than the M1 Max chip. And it sounds like Apple might do that with kind of like a dual Max chip. So it sounds like they're going to take like two M1 Max chips and kind of, stick them together or something like that. So especially with the Mac Pro, they're talking about, maybe like up to 64 GPU cores. I'm thinking with this, we'll call it an M1 Ultra chip, this M1 Ultra chip that might come to the iMac Pro, I think what's going to happen here is we're going to get some of those lower bin CPU components that were supposed to be for the Mac Pro coming to this new iMac. So think of it this way. Look at the, current M1 Pro and M1 Max chips and how they're distributed across the current MacBook Pros, and then apply that same strategy to this new iMac with like an Ultra chip that would probably be for the Mac Pro. So let's say there's a dual M1 Max chip, and instead of 20 CPU cores, it has 16 CPU cores or 14 CPU cores. And then for the GPU side, if Apple's targeting 64 GPU cores on the Mac Pro, well, maybe they have a configuration with 48 GPU cores active that they can ship on this iMac Pro. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen here based on this new timeline where we are now expecting the Mac Pro to actually ship in the second half of 2022. Of course, this iMac Pro will have other benefits, I think, compared to like the M1 iMac. And I think Apple is gonna really separate their lineup going forward. Very much like the old days where they had that square grid of consumer and pro level products, and then they had like the mobile division and the desktop division. I think with this 27-inch iMac Pro, you're gonna get that mini LED display, which, mini LED is for pros because they need the HDR video and HDR capabilities, and then it's just also a nicer display to work on. And you'll also get things like, a thicker enclosure. I think the iMac Pro is going to be thicker than the M1 because that M1 iMac is super thin. And then an expanded port array. Ports make sense on a pro level computer. Maybe they make sense on an entry level computer too, depending on who you are. I know there's a lot of people who still like those regular ports and they don't want to give up on them, or every once in a while you need to plug in some sort of port, and then on your Mac you just have USB-C. But again, I think really for the pro level customers, it's more of a necessity for them. So the iMac will have that display, those ports, and then the power, not like the M1 Max chip that we have now is weak, but they will get even more power over what these laptops can give you. And again, these are going to be a little bit more unconstrained, I think, because Apple doesn't have to worry about battery life in a desktop. They don't have to worry as much about thermals with these bigger enclosures, and they can just let that M1 Max Duo chip just rip through and give you as much performance as possible. Now, with the Mac Mini, I think it's going to be a little bit of a different strategy. We've talked about this obviously a lot too, but I never really get to expand on my thoughts on this. And I think this Pro version of the Mac Mini we've been hearing about it's just going to be very simple in that it's just going to have the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip. I don't think Apple's going to put a Duo chip in there just based on the size of the enclosure for the Mac Mini. I don't think thermally it would really be able to handle it. I mean, maybe it would because these Apple Silicon chips are just so efficient that even the MacBook Pro, the fans rarely spin up. So maybe actually it could handle beefier chips, but I really think they'll stick to the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip. I think those are perfect candidates for a Mac Mini Pro, we'll call it. And when you really think about it, when you look at the history of the Mac Mini, that's always been more of an entry-level computer, something like the M1 Mac Mini, and even the space gray Intel Mac Mini we got, it had some beefier Intel CPUs, but it was never really a powerhouse of a desktop computer. It was really weak, especially in the GPU area, and on some of those CPU configurations, you would get thermal throttling. So when you think about the value perspective of Apple putting in an M1 Pro chip into the Mac Mini, and you think about all the performance you'll get out of a chip like that, and if Apple can price that at around $1,300 with the 512 gigabytes of storage, the 16 gigabytes of memory, which is kind of a default on the M1 Pro chip, that is just going to be a stellar value. I think that's really going to be one of the hidden gems of these Apple Silicon computers. Now, I know we got sidetracked there, but going back to that Bloomberg report, Gurman is expecting this in at least the first half of 2022. So I think the latest this would be released at is WWDC in June for both this iMac Pro and Mac Mini. But I'm thinking these will actually be coming to the gate a little bit faster. I would anticipate these around a March event or an Apple spring product press release or something like that. So that's when I would expect these two computers, because I really feel like for WWDC in June, I really feel like Apple wants to focus on that Mac Pro hardware announcement as kind of the trifecta of their Apple Silicon transition, because this is going to be the pro level computer. This is going to be Apple Silicon Unleashed, the most powerful, computer that Apple is able to ship. And, this is going to be a point of pride for their chip team, who has been working on this stuff for years. And I think they're really going to want to boast with the Mac Pro. Now, we've heard rumors about what this Mac Pro will be like, besides the power, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But like the form factor is supposed to be like half the size of a Mac Pro. And that has me curious on whether or not this will feature any expandability, or if Apple has a new strategy for adding expandability to the Mac, given how the Apple Silicon architecture currently works. It is very closely knit together, very closely tied together, to the point where, I don't think you could just buy like a standard set of RAM and then put it inside of this machine, because all of the Apple Silicon machines we've seen so far have used unified memory. That unified memory architecture is partly what is responsible for why the M1 architecture is so fast, because it can share all those system resources and it can just instantly ping back and forth between like CPU, memory, and GPU, share all those resources. And that's one of the reasons why it is just so snappy and fast, besides looking at things like, CPU or GPU power. Just the speed of everything running through that unified memory and then having up to 64 gigabytes of it on the Macs really is why it is so fast. So for this Mac Pro, maybe Apple will sell some sort of, specialized hardware that can go into it. It'll probably just be like a first-party solution. It'll probably have to use like special connectors, and maybe it will connect to that unified memory bus and all that stuff. But I'm not sure, right? Like in the current Mac Pro, you have a lot more expandability where you can put your own storage, your own memory, even your own GPU. And for this Apple Silicon version, maybe I can see adding more storage, maybe more memory if it's like through like a first party connector. But other than that, like I just can't see it being as expandable. And I think those rumors of a half-size Mac Pro kind of prove that, right? If they're going for a half-size Mac Pro, well, a lot of standard parts in the PC universe probably wouldn't fit inside of that smaller case. So I'm thinking expandability is either going to be no expandability, like you'll have to build it out how you want it to, or Apple will let you expand it, but only if you buy parts from them using their special connection, or maybe some like trusted third parties, or maybe it'll be like a made for Mac Pro program where Apple will open up these connectors and let people make stuff for it. But the Mac Pro itself, Gurman has been very accurate in his reporting on what kind of chips we can expect for the Mac Pro. And he is saying like the entry-level Mac Pro is gonna get a 20-core CPU and then a 64-core GPU. Again, those two, kind of M1 Max chips stacked together. And then for the ultimate, right? We've talked about this before too. Four M1 Max chips kind of glued together, all working together. And when you think about that, when you just look at the raw performance you get out of one M1 Max, and then you think about four of them working together, these are insane numbers when you start to think about them. And it is going to probably blow the existing Intel Mac Pro out of the water. And I just want to see how this competes against other chipsets out in the market right now. I want to see how it competes against Intel's highest end Xeon chipset, and then like the AMD Threadripper. Like, can it actually become the most dominant chip in terms of performance on raw performance rather than just pure optimization? Because the secret behind Apple Silicon is that pure optimization, but just from like, I just want to see if they can just tackle everything and just kind of beat everyone out of the gate with their own chipset. Now, this Mac Pro probably be pretty expensive, right? Like the current Mac Pro's expensive, so we're probably looking around like a $5,000 starting price for this machine. And then the release date, right? Like I said, it's probably coming sooner than we think. When I previously reported on this, I would say, I would expect an announcement in June, but then I would expect it to like ship like at the end of December, like Apple has done in the past with some of their Pro Macs, where they kind of announce it at WWDC and then they ship it like in the last week of December. Well, Gurman is making it sound like Apple is being aggressive in completing this Apple Silicon transition within 2 years. And there's a chance like it'll be announced at WWDC in June and be available very shortly after. So we might actually complete the entire Apple Silicon transition, might be able to get our hands on this Mac Pro by the middle of this year. And that's a decision where I'm like, do I buy a Mac Pro? Because normally, I'm the type of consumer that that's too much power for me, but I gotta be honest, I'm a little tempted to get a Mac Pro this year. I don't know. We'll see when the time comes. If you hit the like button and subscribe enough and give me enough of that YouTube money, maybe I'll have to consider. You might want a review, right? It's gonna be tough. I was able to skip the last Intel Mac Pro. I don't know if I'll be able to skip an Apple Silicon Mac Pro. It just sounds too good. All right, finally, the displays. I know we've been talking about this stuff a lot, so I'm sorry if it's a little bit regurgitated. We are expecting 3 new Apple external displays, an entry-level 24-inch, I'm guessing around $1,000, very similar panel to the M1 iMac, and then a 27-inch display. Now, we have new information on this one because this one's supposed to be like that iMac Pro display that will be releasing, so we're expecting it to be mini LED, probably Pro Motion, and what Gurman reported now is that Apple is working on making this around half the cost of the Pro Display XDR. So when we look at the Pro Display XDR, it's $5,000. That's without the stand, by the way. So if Gurman is accurate here, Apple should be releasing this 27-inch mini LED monitor for around $2,500. And then for that next Pro Display XDR, the 32-inch version, Apple can price that pretty high again, right? They don't have to come down to the lower part of the pricing category. They could probably keep it at around $5,000 and then charge you an extra $1,000 for a stand. I'm guessing the 27-inch model will have the stand included because I don't think anyone wants to pay for an optional $1,000 stand in that price range. That is basically everything we can expect for these next Apple Silicon Macs. And then obviously there's still more Macs to come by this year, an M2 MacBook Air, an entry-level M2 MacBook Pro, and an M2 Mac Mini. But the entry-level Macs are already on Apple Silicon, so that's really not the topic for this video, but they are coming this year, if you're wondering. But hopefully you liked this video. Hopefully you found it informative. Hopefully you like my thoughts on all this. If you did, give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. 2022 sounds like it's going to be crazy. And yeah, hope you have a great day. Hope you, again, have a happy new year. And I'll see you in the next video. And, for the people that wanted it. Eesh. Take care.